Hello, this is Professor Asma Parveen from Department of Psychology, Aligarh Muslim University. Today I will be talking about a new topic that is non-random or non-probability sampling techniques that we are using in research. When we conduct a research, the choice between using probability or non-probability samples is an important consideration. Non probability samples are often used when the goal is to gather primary data for creating questionnaires or measurement tools rather than applying the findings to the entire population. Non probability samples can also be a more cost effective option if the cost of using a probability sample is very high. Additionally, time constraints may lead researchers to choose a non probability sample as probability sample can be time consuming. Accuracy of the sampling frame is another factor to consider. For example, if a telephone survey is conducted to predict voting patterns and the telephone directory is used as the sampling frame, individuals without access to telephones will be excluded from the study. In situations where there is insufficient data available to create a sampling frame, such as in developing countries, non probability sampling may be the only viable option. However, it is generally recommended to use a probability sample when conducting a study that aims to support or refute an important research question or hypothesis and when the results will be applied to the entire population. Probability samples provide a higher level of confidence in the generalizability of the findings. The choice between probability and non probability samples depends on various factors such as the purpose of the study, cost considerations, time constraints, and the availability and accuracy of the sampling frame. While non probability sample can be useful in certain cases, probability samples are generally preferred when aiming to make broader conclusions about a population. Non probability sampling is a method of selecting people for a study based on specific criteria rather than at random. This means that not everyone has an equal chance of being included in the sample. While this type of sampling is easier and cheaper to do, it does come with a higher risk of bias. This means that the conclusions we can draw about the larger population are not as strong as with probability samples, and our findings may be more limited. However, even if we use a non probability sample, we should still strive to make it as representative of the whole population as possible. Non probability sampling techniques are often used in exploratory and qualitative research. In these types of studies, the goal is not to test a hypothesis about a larger population, but rather to gather initial data and insights. This allows researchers to gain a deeper understanding of a particular topic. By using non probability sampling, researchers can select participants who possess certain characteristics or experiences that are relevant to their study. This targeted approach helps to ensure that the data collected is rich and meaningful. Mass media researchers often utilize non probability sampling, particularly when they have access to available samples, rely on volunteer subjects, or employ purposive sampling techniques. For example, when testing drugs, researchers must use volunteers due to ethical considerations and other factors. This method allows them to gather data and make informed decisions about respecting the rights and well being of individuals involved. Non probability or non random sampling designs are often used in research when the traditional method of selecting elements from a population based on probability is not feasible. This can occur when the population size is unknown or when individual elements cannot be identified. Instead, researchers choose elements based on other factors. There are six common non random designs used in both qualitative and quantitative research. That is, quota sampling, accidental sampling, convenience sampling, judgmental or purposive sampling, expert sampling, and snowball sampling. The main distinction between these designs in quantitative and qualitative research lies in the predetermined sample size. In quantitative research, these designs are used to select a specific number of cases in advance. On the other hand, qualitative research does not determine the number of respondents beforehand. Instead, researchers continue selecting additional cases until they have gathered enough data. In qualitative research, judgmental and accidental sampling strategies are primarily employed to choose respondents. Expert sampling is similar to judgmental sampling, but it specifically targets experts in the field being studied as the sampling population. Quota and sampling can also be used in qualitative research, but without a predetermined number of cases in mind. These non random sampling designs provide researchers with flexibility and adaptability in gathering data, allowing them to tailor their approach to the unique needs of their study. By understanding the different non random sampling techniques available, researchers can make informed decisions about which design best suits their research objectives. So, I will start with discussing all the non random sampling techniques, and the first one is quota sampling. Quota sampling is a method that allows researchers to focus on studying a specific group of people. This method is chosen because it makes it easier for the researcher to find and communicate with the individuals in the desired group. For instance, if a researcher wants to understand the opinions of male and female students regarding the facilities at their universities, they would visit locations where these students typically gather and engage them in conversations. The researcher would continue this process until they have gathered a sufficient number of participants for their study. To collect the necessary information, the researcher can employ various techniques such as interviews or questionnaires. The purpose of quota sampling is to ensure that the sample accurately represents the characteristics of the larger population. Researchers establish quotas based on specific criteria such as age, gender, or ethnicity to ensure diversity within the sample. By doing so, they aim to capture a comprehensive range of perspective and experiences. For example, if the researcher wants to examine the attitudes of young adults towards climate change, they may set quotas to include equal numbers of males and females from different age groups. There are different types of quota sampling, and the first one is controlled and uncontrolled quota sampling. In controlled quota sampling, the researcher must adhere to certain rules when choosing samples. They can only select samples based on specific criteria, which means they have limitations or control in their selection process. That is why it is termed as controlled quota sampling. On the other hand, in uncontrolled quota sampling, there are no restrictions on the researcher's choice of samples. They have the freedom to choose sample members however they want without any predefined criteria. That is why it is termed as uncontrolled sampling. This distinction between controlled and uncontrolled quota sampling helps researchers to have different levels of flexibility in their sampling process. Controlled quota sampling provides a more structured approach where researchers follow specific guidelines and criteria to ensure a representative sample. This can be useful when studying a specific population or when trying to compare different groups within a population. By adhering to these rules, researchers can minimize bias and increase the validity of their findings. On the other hand, uncontrolled quota sampling offers researchers more freedom and flexibility in selecting samples. This can be beneficial when studying a diverse population or when exploring various characteristics within a group. Researchers can choose sample members based on their own judgment and preferences without being constrained by predefined criteria. However, this also means that the sample may not be as representative or generalizable to the larger population. Another category of quota sampling is proportional and non proportional quota sampling. In proportional quota sampling, the goal is to select individuals from each group in the population in the same proportions as they exist in the whole population. For example, if 60% of the population is of males, then the 60% of the sample should be consisted of males and 40% females. This method is commonly used in surveys and polls to ensure representation. On the other hand, non proportional quota sampling is a less strict approach that allows researchers to select a minimum number of individuals from specific groups. This can be particularly useful when it is challenging to find certain types of people or when certain groups are crucial to study, such as hard to reach population. By using this method, researchers can ensure that they have enough participants from these important groups to obtain meaningful results. Both proportional and non proportional quota sampling have their advantages and limitations. Proportional quota sampling ensures that the sample represents the population accurately, which enhances the generalizability of the findings. However, it may be difficult to achieve perfect proportionality due to practical constraints. Non proportional quota sampling provides flexibility in selecting participants, allowing researchers to focus on specific groups of interest. Nonetheless, this method may introduce bias if the selected groups do not adequately represent the population. Quota sampling is used by researchers to gather data from different groups or categories within a population, and this process has certain steps. First step is researchers identify the various strata or groups or quotas in the population that they want to include in their sample. Next, they determine the number of individuals that should be included in each group based on the overall population. This helps them create a sample that accurately represents the population as a whole. Once the desired sample size for each group is determined, researchers then select individuals to participate in the study. This selection process takes into account factors such as the size of the population, margin of error, the desired level of accuracy in the results, the level of confidence needed in the findings, and the expectations about how people will respond. Researchers use their own judgment to choose participants from each group in order to meet the quotas they have set. By using quota sampling, researchers can ensure that their sample is representative of the entire population. This helps them to draw conclusions and make generalizations about the population based on the data collected from the sample. Quota sampling offers numerous advantages to the research, and one advantage is its speed and affordability. And because of this quota sampling becomes an ideal for situations with limited time or budget constraints. Researchers can selectively choose participants from various groups, ensuring representation from different demographics. For example, when examining voting patterns, individuals from all diverse groups can be included. Moreover, quota sampling proves valuable when studying large populations becomes impractical. By obtaining a sample with quota sampling that accurately represents the entire group, researchers can draw meaningful conclusions. Another positive aspect or advantage of quota sampling is its cost effectiveness. Unlike other methods, it does not require extensive knowledge of the population size or distribution. This means that even with limited information, quota sampling can still be employed. Another advantage of this method is that researchers have the flexibility to target specific types of individuals for their study. This feature proves particularly useful when focusing on a particular subgroup within a larger population. So, in summary, we can say that quota sampling serves as a practical and efficient approach to selecting a research sample, enabling the acquisition of valuable insights into various phenomena. Quota sampling, while useful in certain research contexts, has its limitations also. And one drawback is that the sample obtained from this quota sampling is not random, which makes it difficult to apply the findings to the entire group being studied. This means that the results may not accurately represent the larger population. Another limitation is that selecting individuals who are easily accessible in one location may result in a sample that does not accurately represent the whole population. These individuals may have unique qualities that make them different from the rest of the group, leading to the biased results. To improve the accuracy of the sample, it is recommended to include individuals from various locations where the target population is likely to be found. By doing so, a more comprehensive and representative sample can be obtained. It is important to understand that quota sampling does not allow for estimating sampling errors or applying the findings to the larger population like other sampling methods do. Therefore, the results obtained from a quota sample may not be as reliable or accurate. Additionally, there is a risk of research bias in quota sampling as the selection of participants is subjective and based on specific criteria. This means that the researcher's personal judgment and preferences may influence the selection process, potentially introducing bias into the results. Despite these limitations, quota sampling can still provide valuable insights and be useful in certain research contexts. It is important for researchers to carefully consider the limitations and potential biases associated with quota sampling when interpreting and generalizing the findings. Next category of non random sampling is accidental sampling. Accidental sampling is a method in which a researcher selects subjects by chance encounters until they have enough for their sample. This type of sampling does not account for bias unless it is accompanied by a probability sample or a complete census. Despite this limitation, accidental samples can still be valuable in scientific research due to their cost effectiveness and convenience, as well as their potential to generate new insights and hypotheses. To illustrate, let us consider a program director who wants to draw conclusions about their ongoing program. The director may choose to study beneficiaries who have sought services from the agency. Similarly, a community organizer aiming to find out the public opinion on health status might interview available community members such as shopkeepers, daily wage earners, and barbers. In both cases, The samples consist of individuals who are accessible for study. While accidental sampling may not provide a comprehensive representation of a population, it can offer valuable information within certain contexts. By interviewing the first 150 people they encounter at a mall entrance, for example, researchers can gain insights into a specific demographic or group of individuals. These findings can then be used to inform further research or guide decision making processes. It is important to consider here that accidental sampling should not be solely relied upon when estimating bias or making generalizations about a larger population. There are certain key characteristics of accidental sampling, and first one is the convenience. Accidental sampling relies on the convenience of selecting participants who are readily available to the researcher. This could include individuals who happen to be in a particular location at a specific time, such as visitors to a shopping mall or attendees at a public event. Another characteristic is non random selection. Unlike probability sampling methods, where participants are selected through random processes, accidental sampling involves non random selection based on factors such as proximity, convenience, or willingness to participate. As a result, the sample may not be representative of the population. Another characteristic of accidental sampling is subjectivity. Accidental sampling is subjective as the researcher has discretion in choosing participants based on practical considerations and personal judgment. This subjectivity can introduce bias into the sample selection process. Another aspect is the limited generalizability because accidental sampling does not involve random selection. The findings obtained from the sample may not be generalizable to the broader population. The sample may not accurately reflect the characteristics or diversity of the population of interest. Another important aspect is practicality and efficiency. Accidental sampling is often chosen for its practicality and efficiency, particularly in situations where time and resources are limited. It allows researchers to quickly gather data without the need for complex sampling procedures or extensive planning. There are certain advantages of accidental sampling. Accidental sampling is particularly beneficial for initial or exploratory research, providing quick insights and data that can later be used for more comprehensive studies. Another major advantage of accidental sampling is its low cost, making it an ideal choice when time, money, or resources are limited. This method becomes especially valuable when we encounter difficulties in reaching a specific group of people or lack a predetermined list of individuals to sample from. Accidental sampling is effective when our research goal does not involve making generalizations about the population, but rather aims to gain a deep understanding or explore something new. In these cases, accidental sampling allows us to gather information and insights that may not have been possible through other methods. Another advantage of this method is that this approach can serve as a preliminary step before conducting a larger research study, help us to test out ideas and hypotheses on a smaller scale. But this method also has certain limitations, and one of the limitation or drawback of accidental sampling is that it may not provide a representative sample of the population being studied. Since participants are selected based on convenience or availability, there is a risk of bias and the results may not accurately reflect the larger group. Another limitation of this method is that Accidental sampling relies heavily on chance, which means that certain individuals or groups may be overrepresented or underrepresented in the sample. This can lead to skewed findings and limit the generalizability of the research. Therefore, while accidental sampling can be useful in certain situations, researchers should be cautious about drawing broad conclusions from its results. Another important consideration when using accidental sampling is the potential for self selection bias. Participants who volunteer or agree to take part in the study may have different characteristics or motivations compared to those who decline. This can introduce a bias into the data and affect the validity of the findings. Researchers need to be aware of this limitation and take steps to minimize its impact, such as clearly defining the criteria for participation and ensuring confidentiality to encourage honest responses. Despite these limitations, accidental sampling can still provide valuable insights and serves as a starting point for a future research. It can help researchers identify patterns, generate hypotheses, and explore new areas of study. By gathering preliminary data through accidental sampling, researchers can gain a better understanding of the topic and refine their research questions for future studies. It can also be a cost effective way to gather initial information before investing more resources into a larger scale study. This is all. Thank you.